The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon in Charlotte, North Carolina, when Miriam Carter awoke. At 45 years old, Miriam was a respected judge known for her firm stance and impeccable ethics. From a young age, she knew the road to success would be difficult. As a black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated system, every step she took was an achievement that required far more effort than most could imagine. Miriam sighed as she finished dressing, selecting a sharp gray suit. Her practiced hands adjusted the lapel of her jacket with precision. Today was going to be challenging, as it often was. She had an important hearing scheduled for the morning, a high-profile racial discrimination case that had garnered significant media attention. As she descended to the kitchen, Miriam found her daughter, Tasha, 16, already awake and devouring a bowl of cereal. Tasha, inheriting her mother's fighting spirit, had a sharp mind and a strong desire to make a difference in the world. "Good morning, Mom," Tasha said with a warm smile as she adjusted her curls into a ponytail. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Miriam replied, grabbing a steaming cup of coffee that her daughter had already prepared for her. "Yes, but I'm nervous about my history test today. It's on the civil rights movement. I've been reviewing everything you told me about the movement." Miriam smiled with pride, knowing how important it was for Tasha to understand the historical battles against injustice. "You'll do great. You have the strength of our ancestors within you." Tasha nodded, feeling the weight of those words. "I know, Mom. Thanks for always inspiring me." With one last sip of coffee, Miriam gave her daughter a quick kiss on the forehead and grabbed her purse. "I'm heading out a little earlier today. I have a stop to make before going to the courthouse." The heart of Charlotte was where the old met the new, with historic buildings and glass skyscrapers sharing the space. Miriam decided to stop by a café she rarely visited, a luxurious place where she knew she could enjoy an excellent coffee and gather her thoughts before the intense hearing ahead. She entered the establishment, greeted by the aroma of freshly ground coffee and the sight of elegantly arranged tables. She walked up to the counter, where Sarah, a young attendant in her mid-20s, was busy taking an order. Sarah, a white woman with her blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun, barely noticed Miriam until she approached. "Good morning," Miriam said with a smile, trying to make a friendly connection. Sarah looked up, and her expression hardened almost immediately. She responded in a cold, distant tone. "What can I get you?" Miriam, despite noticing the shift in attitude, maintained her composure. "I'd like a black coffee, please." As Sarah began to prepare the order, the tension between them was palpable. Miriam watched the young woman with curiosity, trying to understand the source of her hostility. It wasn't the first time Miriam had faced such an attitude, but it was always painful to realize that, despite all the progress, prejudice still lingered in everyday situations. Sarah handed over the coffee without even making eye contact. "That'll be $5. Miriam took a $20 bill from her wallet and handed it to the attendant. "Here you go." Sarah quickly took the money, almost without touching it, and returned the change with the same coldness. "Thanks," she said, but her tone lacked any real gratitude. Miriam hesitated for a moment, holding the coffee cup in her hands. Part of her wanted to let it slide, but another part knew she needed to say something. "You know," she began, her voice calm but meaningful, "a little kindness makes everyone's day better." Sarah looked at Miriam, finally making eye contact. There was a flicker of discomfort in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a defensive expression. "I'm just doing my job." Miriam nodded slowly. "I understand, but the way we treat people is part of our job, don't you think?" Sarah's expression softened slightly, though her demeanor remained guarded. "Maybe you're right. I'll keep that in mind." Miriam offered a small smile. "I hope you have a good day." With that, she turned and left the cafe, already bracing herself for what promised to be an even more challenging day ahead. Little did she know that simple encounter would set off a chain of events far beyond that ordinary morning. Sarah didn't respond, but the flush on her cheeks revealed that Miriam's words had struck a chord. She averted her gaze, focusing on cleaning the counter. Realizing that any further attempt at dialogue would be futile at that moment, Miriam decided to leave. But before she walked out, she said in a firm yet non-confrontational tone, "Have a good day." Sarah murmured an almost inaudible "you too," but Miriam was already on her way out. As she made her way to the courthouse, the judge reflected on their encounter. A sense of discomfort settled in her chest, but she pushed it aside, concentrating on the day ahead. Little did Miriam know that this seemingly insignificant meeting would soon become a crucial part of the day, not just for her, but for Sarah as well. The two were about to discover that fate had plans far beyond a simple morning coffee. The Charlotte courthouse was bustling that morning. Lawyers and clients hurried through the corridors while court staff prepared for another day of proceedings. Amidst all the commotion, Miriam Carter walked with her usual calm and imposing demeanor, her presence unmistakable. She entered the courtroom, where she was presiding over the day's case, a significant racial discrimination lawsuit that had attracted considerable media attention. As she settled into her judge's seat, Miriam watched the room gradually fill up. There was a palpable tension in the air, the kind of energy that precedes pivotal moments. Shortly after she was seated, the courtroom doors opened again, and a blonde woman walked in, appearing out of place amidst the formal setting. Miriam froze when she realized who it was: Sarah, the café attendant. The expression of surprise was brief, but intense. Sarah, for her part, turned pale when her eyes met Miriam's. Sarah looked small and insecure, a complete contrast to her attitude earlier in the café. She was there as a witness in a racial discrimination case, and the irony of the situation was not lost on Miriam. The judge took a deep breath, controlling any urge to let the morning's interaction influence her judgment. Sarah tried to compose herself as she was guided to the witness chair. The room seemed even quieter with her presence. The lawyers and others present had no idea of the earlier encounter, but Miriam could feel the tension radiating from Sarah. The defense attorney began the questioning. "Ms. Sarah Miller, how long have you worked at the café?" Sarah cleared her throat, her voice sounding low and nervous. "About 3 years. Have you ever witnessed or been a victim of racial discrimination at work?" the attorney asked directly. "Yes, I've seen some situations," Sarah replied, hesitantly, avoiding eye contact with Miriam at all costs. Miriam maintained her neutral expression, but her mind was working overtime. She would not let her emotions interfere with the hearing. Still, the weight of the situation was hard to ignore. The attorney continued, "And how did you respond to these situations?" Sarah bit her lip, her voice trembling slightly. "I tried to do what was right. I reported it to the manager, but not always was it taken seriously." The silence in the room seemed to grow with each word Sarah spoke. Miriam observed every detail, every nuance of the young woman, trying to understand who she really was. The answers were vague, as if Sarah was trying to distance herself from what she was saying, perhaps fearing that her own actions would be scrutinized under the same lens. Miriam interrupted the attorney's line of questioning. "Ms. Miller," her voice firm but not intimidating, "do you believe that people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background?" Sarah finally lifted her gaze, meeting Miriam's eyes. Her eyes were filled with a mix of fear and shame. "Yes, Your Honor, I believe that." "Then I imagine you would agree that everyone, regardless of their social position, deserves the same respect, right?" Miriam continued, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. Yes, of course," Sarah responded, her voice almost a whisper. Miriam nodded slowly, not breaking eye contact. "Well, I hope your actions reflect your words in the future." Sarah felt the weight of that statement like a hammer in the courtroom. She couldn't take her eyes off Miriam, the woman she had treated with disdain just hours earlier, unaware of the true position of authority and respect Miriam held. The confrontation was silent, but powerful. Miriam, as always, maintained her professionalism, but Sarah felt the impact of what she had done. She realized with painful clarity that her actions had not gone unnoticed, and that perhaps she was in the wrong place to judge what was right or wrong. The courtroom was in solemn silence as Miriam Carter leaned back in her judge's chair, attentively observing the proceedings. The case before her was one of the most important of the week, and Sarah, the café attendant, as a witness, added a layer of personal complexity Miriam could not have anticipated. As the defense attorney continued with their questions, Sarah struggled to maintain her composure. She was visibly uncomfortable, and her answers were punctuated by long pauses and nervous glances. The tension increased with each moment, especially as Sarah realized she was testifying before the woman she had treated with such contempt earlier that day. "Ms. Miller," the attorney said, trying to reassure the young woman, "you mentioned that you've witnessed discrimination at the cafe. Could you tell us about one of those incidents?" Sarah hesitated, the memory of her encounter with Miriam still fresh in her mind. "Sure. Once, there was a customer who was treated differently because of his skin color. I tried to do something, but I couldn't change much." Miriam noticed the inconsistency in Sarah's response. There was something more behind her words, and the judge knew it was her responsibility to seek the truth, regardless of personal circumstances. "Ms. Miller," Miriam began, her voice firm and professional, "are you aware of the seriousness of what is being discussed here today?" Sarah, unable to avoid Miriam's gaze, nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." Miriam nodded and continued, "Very well. In your experience at the cafe, would you say that all customers are treated equally?" Sarah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the question. I think that sometimes some people might be treated differently because of unconscious biases." The room was in absolute silence as everyone waited for Miriam's next question. The silent confrontation between the two women was palpable, and Sarah felt as though she was being measured not just by her words, but by her actions. Miriam leaned slightly forward, her voice becoming softer, but still filled with authority. "Ms. Miller, do you believe that your own actions always reflect the respect and equality you expect from others?" Sarah's face turned red, and she struggled to respond. I try to be fair to everyone, Your Honor." Miriam did not avert her gaze. Trying is not enough, especially when dealing with fundamental issues like human dignity. Every action we take reflects our values, whether we are aware of it or not. Sarah lowered her head, feeling the shame rise up her spine. She knew Miriam was referring to their encounter earlier, even though no one else in the courtroom was aware of it. The defense attorney noticed Sarah's growing discomfort and attempted to intervene. "Your Honor, perhaps we should." Miriam raised her hand, gently interrupting him. "I understand, counselor, but it's important for all witnesses to grasp the weight of their words and actions." She then turned her attention back to Sarah. "Ms. Miller, what you've shared with us so far shows that you are aware of the issue. But the real question is, are you willing to act on that awareness, both in your personal and professional life?" Sarah, her voice choked with emotion, responded, I'll do my best to change. I promise." Miriam nodded, satisfied with the sincerity in Sarah's voice, but aware that promises are just the beginning. That's the only way to truly combat prejudice, Ms. Miller. It's not just about acknowledging the wrong, but about taking steps to correct it and prevent it from recurring. The hearing continued, but the impact of those words resonated with both Miriam and Sarah. The casual encounter at the cafe had turned into a moment of revelation, not just for Sarah, but also for Miriam, who saw in the young woman a chance for redemption and change. Miriam knew the day was far from over, and that what would follow would be crucial for both of them. After the hearing, Miriam Carter left the courthouse, feeling the weight of the day on her shoulders. The encounter with Sarah had been unexpected and revealing, leaving her pondering how small interactions can have a profound impact. She wondered if Sarah would truly change her attitudes, or if those words spoken in court were merely a reaction to the discomfort of the situation. As she walked toward the parking lot, Miriam heard a voice calling her. "Judge Carter." Turning around, she saw Sarah running towards her, visibly anxious. Miriam stopped, maintaining her calm demeanor. "Ms. Miller," she said with a slight nod. "What can I do for you?" Sarah paused to catch her breath before speaking. I wanted to apologize again for what happened this morning. I didn't know who you were." Miriam crossed her arms, studying the young woman before her. "And if you had known, would you have acted differently?" Sarah hesitated. The question was uncomfortable but important. "I think so," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But that's wrong. I know that now. I shouldn't treat anyone differently, no matter who they are." Miriam nodded slowly, seeing that Sarah was beginning to understand. Real change doesn't come from knowing who someone else is, but from recognizing the intrinsic value of every human being, Miriam said firmly. And that's something you need to carry with you, not just today, but always. Sarah looked close to tears. I was raised in a way, maybe not the right way. My family always had strong opinions, and I never questioned them. But now I see that I need to change. Miriam softened her stance slightly, sensing the sincerity in Sarah's voice. What matters is what you do from now on. We all have the capacity to grow and change, but that requires effort, self-reflection, and sometimes discomfort. Sarah lowered her head, absorbing Miriam's words. I want to change. I want to be better. I just don't know where to start. Miriam stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. You've already started by recognizing that you need to change. The next step is to educate yourself, question your beliefs, and be willing to listen to and learn from others' experiences. Sarah looked up, meeting Miriam's gaze. Do you think it's possible that someone like me can really change? Miriam gave a slight smile. I believe everyone has the potential to change, as long as they're willing to work for it. But remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's an ongoing process. Sarah nodded, a new determination forming in her eyes. Thank you, Your Honor, for giving me this chance to learn. Miriam removed her hand from Sarah's shoulder and gave a small nod. Change begins with intention, but is sustained by action. Now it's up to you to make that journey. Sarah said her goodbyes and walked towards her car, feeling lighter but aware of the responsibilities she had taken on. Meanwhile, Miriam watched the young woman leave, hoping her words had planted a seed that would, over time, grow into something positive. The unexpected encounter with Sarah left Miriam contemplative but also hopeful. She knew the fight against prejudice was challenging and constant, but moments like these, where a spark of change was ignited, made every effort worthwhile. Miriam then got into her car, took a deep breath, and prepared to face the rest of the day, knowing that the path to justice, both in the courts and in life, was long and filled with challenges. That night, after a long day of work, Miriam Carter sat in her living room, gazing out the window at the city of Charlotte glowing in the distance. The interaction with Sarah earlier was still on her mind. As a judge, she had seen the best and worst of humanity, but moments like these, where someone showed a willingness to change, always touched her deeply. Miriam was lost in thought when she heard a soft knock at the door. It was her daughter, Jasmine, a 22-year-old law student. Jasmine entered the room with a cup of tea in hand, smiling at her mother. "Mom, you look worried. Did something happen at court today?" Miriam accepted the tea gratefully and sighed before responding. "I had an unexpected encounter with a young woman who, well, it made me reflect on the power of small interactions." Jasmine sat down next to her mother, curious. "A young woman? What did she do?" Miriam hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "She was rude to me this morning, not knowing who I was." Later, the same young woman appeared in court as a witness in a racial discrimination case. It was interesting to see how her context and perception changed when she discovered my identity. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And how did you handle it?" Miriam gave a faint smile, recalling the words she had shared with Sarah. "I try to show her that respect should be given to everyone, no matter who they are or what they do." I think I managed to plant a seed of reflection in her. Jasmine pondered for a moment before asking, "Do you think people can really change, Mom? I mean, truly change from the heart?" Miriam looked at her daughter, recognizing the same quest for justice that guided her. "I believe everyone has the potential to change, Jasmine. But real change requires courage to confront our own prejudices, to admit our mistakes, and most importantly, to act according to the new truths we discover." Jasmine nodded, absorbing her mother's words. "Do you think this young woman will really change?" Miriam sighed, looking out at the city once more. "I hope so. She seems sincere in her desire to be better. But only time will tell if that intention turns into action." Jasmine smiled and held her mother's hand. "I'm sure that with your words, you made a big difference in her life today, just like you do in the lives of so many people who cross your path." Miriam squeezed her daughter's hand affectionately, feeling the warmth of their connection. We do what we can, Jasmine. In the end, each of us is responsible for our own path. But if we can help someone see the light, then it's worth it. The conversation with Jasmine brought a sense of peace to Miriam, and as they continued talking, she realized she was right in her belief in change. It wasn't easy, nor was it always guaranteed, but the possibility of transforming hearts and minds, even if just one at a time, was worth fighting for. With this newfound serenity, Miriam felt ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing that every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, could be the catalyst for real and lasting change. The next morning, Miriam Carter prepared for another day in court. The conversation with her daughter, Jasmine, had given her a fresh perspective on her encounter with Sarah. Now, more than ever, Miriam was determined to continue using her position to foster real and enduring change. As Miriam entered the courthouse, she was surprised to find Sarah Miller waiting outside her office. The young woman looked nervous, holding a small bag in her hands. Miriam furrowed her brow, unsure of what to expect. "Ms. Miller," Miriam greeted with a nod. "What brings you here so early?" Sarah took a step forward, her expression a mix of uncertainty and determination. "Judge Carter, I know I probably shouldn't be bothering you, but I felt I needed to talk to you again." Miriam studied Sarah for a moment, noticing the sincerity in her eyes. "Of course, come in. Let's talk." The two entered Miriam's office, where Sarah sat timidly in one of the chairs in front of the judge's desk. Miriam took a seat on the other side, waiting for Sarah to begin. Sarah placed the bag on the desk and started to speak, her voice low but clear. "I spent all night thinking about what you said, about how important it is to treat everyone with respect, regardless of who they are. It really touched me. I realized I have a lot to change in myself." Miriam looked at Sarah with curiosity. "I'm glad to hear that my words had an impact. But what brings you here today?" Sarah took a deep breath and opened the bag, revealing a small book. "I brought this for you. It's a book my grandmother gave me when I was a child. It talks about empathy, about understanding others. I never paid much attention to it before, but now I think it might be the right time." Miriam carefully took the book, looking at the worn cover. "That's a very kind gesture, Sarah. But why did you decide to give this to me?" Sarah looked down, her voice filled with emotion. "Because you showed me something yesterday. You showed me that I can be a better person, and I want you to know that I will truly try. I want to learn to be more empathetic, more fair, and I thought this book would be a good start." Miriam felt a warmth in her heart at Sarah's words. It was rare to see someone so young recognize their faults and be willing to correct them. She placed the book on the desk and looked at Sarah with an encouraging smile. "I'm deeply touched by your gesture, Sarah, and I'm proud to see you taking this step. Learning to be empathetic and fair isn't easy, but it's the only way to create a better world." Sarah smiled, visibly relieved by Miriam's words. "I know I have a long way to go, but I'm ready to start." Miriam nodded. "And whenever you feel you need guidance or someone to talk to, know that I'm here. Not just as a judge, but as someone who believes in the power of change." Miriam's words brought tears to Sarah's eyes, which she quickly wiped away. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot to me." Miriam stood and extended her hand to Sarah, who shook it firmly. "Remember, Sarah, every small step counts. Don't give up on yourself." Sarah left Miriam's office with renewed hope and determination. As Miriam watched the young woman walk away, she felt more confident than ever that she was on the right path. Every person she managed to reach was a small victory in the fight for a fairer and more equal world. Miriam looked at the small book on her desk, a symbol of a new beginning, both for Sarah and for herself. She knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was ready to face them, with the conviction that change begins with an act of courage and an open heart. In the following week, Miriam was busy with a new complex case, but her mind often returned to her meeting with Sarah. That small book Sarah had given her now rested on her desk, a constant reminder of the power a simple action can have in someone's life. As Miriam prepared for a hearing, she received a call from an unknown number. She answered, surprised to hear a familiar voice on the other end. "Judge Carter? This is Sarah Miller. I hope I'm not bothering you." Miriam smiled and sat down in her chair. "Sarah, you're not bothering me at all. How are you?" Sarah took a deep breath before responding, her voice revealing a mix of nervousness and enthusiasm. I'm actually doing well. I just wanted to share something with you. Something that happened after our last conversation. I'm glad to hear that. What happened? Miriam asked, genuinely curious. Sarah hesitated for a moment, as if gathering her courage. Well, I went back to the cafe where I work and started paying more attention to how my colleagues and I treated our customers. I realized that unconsciously my coworkers and I were treating people differently based on how they looked. It really bothered me. Miriam nodded, listening intently. And what did you do about it? I decided to talk to my manager, Sarah continued. I told him about what I'd noticed and suggested that we all undergo bias awareness training. I was nervous, thinking he might ignore me or worse, fire me, but he agreed. He said he'd never thought about it before, but that it was important. Now, all the cafe employees will go through this training next week. Miriam was silent for a moment, absorbing what Sarah had said. When she spoke, her voice was full of pride. Sarah, that's incredible. You took the initiative and made a real difference in your workplace. That's not easy, but you did exactly what needed to be done. Sarah smiled on the other end of the line, clearly moved. I never would have had the courage to do this if it weren't for you. Our conversation opened my eyes. It made me realize that if I wanted things to change, I needed to start with myself. Miriam felt a wave of satisfaction and gratitude. I'm so proud of you, Sarah. What you did will not only benefit your colleagues, but also all the customers who come through the cafe. You've set an example of how change starts with a simple act of courage. Sarah sighed, looking relieved. Thank you, Your Honor. It really means a lot to me. Keep on this path, Sarah, Miriam said firmly. The journey is long, but you've already taken an important step. And remember, the actions we take today can have an impact beyond what we can imagine. Sarah agreed, her voice filled with determination. I will keep going. I promise. After the call, Miriam sat in silence, reflecting on the conversation. What had begun as an uncomfortable encounter at the cafe had transformed into a series of events that would affect many lives. It was proof that every action, no matter how small, can trigger significant changes. Later that day, as she was preparing to end her workday, Miriam picked up the book Sarah had given her and opened it. On the first pages, she found a handwritten dedication, dated many years ago. Asterisk to Sarah, with love. May you always see the best in people and treat everyone with the dignity they deserve. Asterisk. Miriam closed the book with a soft smile. She knew Sarah's journey was just beginning, but she also knew the young woman was already on the right path. And in some way, that small interaction had left a mark on Miriam as well, renewing her faith in the impact one person can have on another's life. The judge carefully placed the book in her bag, determined to take it home and share it with Jasmine. She knew the story wasn't over, and she was eager to see where Sarah's courage would lead her next. Days passed since Miriam's phone call with Sarah. The routine at the courthouse continued as usual, but Miriam carried a new energy, inspired by Sarah's actions and the impact of their interaction. On a sunny morning, as Miriam was preparing to start the day's session, she received an unexpected visit. One of the court's receptionists entered her office with a note in hand. Judge Carter, someone left this at the reception for you, the receptionist said, handing her the paper. Miriam thanked her, curious, and opened the note. It contained a simple but powerful message. Asterisk, thank you for believing in me. Sarah. Asterisk along with the note was a photo of the cafe staff, all smiling, holding certificates from the training they had completed. Miriam smiled at the photo, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She put the note and photo in her folder, promising herself she'd show Jasmine later. But she was soon interrupted by a knock on the door. Come in, Miriam said, still smiling. The door opened, and to her surprise, a group of lawyers entered, led by Benjamin Cole, a civil rights attorney Miriam greatly respected. He looked serious, causing Miriam's smile to slowly fade. Benjamin, what brings you here today? I hope it's something good, she said, trying to keep her tone light. Benjamin sat in the chair across from her desk, sighing deeply before speaking. Miriam, you know I have the utmost respect for you, both as a professional and as a person. That's why I thought you should know about something that's happening." Miriam furrowed her brow, concerned by Benjamin's tone. "What's going on?" Benjamin looked directly into Miriam's eyes, his expression grave. "There's a group in the city, some of them very influential, who are unhappy with your decisions in court, especially those involving racial issues. They believe you're being biased." Miriam felt a surge of frustration and anger. She had always known her work as a black judge dealing with racial justice issues would attract criticism. However, hearing this from someone like Benjamin, whom she respected, left her unsettled. "And what's the basis for these accusations?" Miriam asked, keeping her voice steady. Benjamin hesitated before answering. "They're claiming you're partial, that your decisions are driven by a political agenda rather than impartial justice. Some are pushing to have you investigated by the judicial board." Miriam took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm. "I've always relied on the law and the facts to make my decisions, Benjamin. This is an attack on my integrity." Benjamin nodded, understanding Miriam's outrage. "I know that, Miriam, and so do many of us. But we need to be realistic about the situation. They have power and are willing to use it. I think you need to prepare for what's coming." Miriam was silent for a moment, letting Benjamin's words sink in. She had always known that her position made her a target for criticism, but she hadn't anticipated things escalating to this point. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice filled with determination. "I'm not going to bend to these pressures, Benjamin. If they think they can intimidate me into abandoning my duty to fight for justice, they're sorely mistaken. I will continue to do my job with the integrity I've always had." Benjamin gave a slight smile, admiring Miriam's strength. "I knew you'd say that, and that's why I'm here. Some other lawyers and I are prepared to defend your position. If they try to attack you, we'll stand by your side." Miriam felt a wave of gratitude. "That means a lot to me, Benjamin, knowing I have allies who understand what's at stake." Benjamin stood, extending his hand to Miriam. "We need each other, Miriam. We're not alone in this fight." Miriam shook his hand, feeling the camaraderie and support. "Let's face this together, then." Benjamin nodded before leaving the room, leaving Miriam alone with her thoughts. She knew tough times were ahead, but she had no doubt that she was doing the right thing. The fight for justice had never been easy, and she was prepared to face any challenge that came her way. Later, as Miriam returned home, she reflected on everything that had happened in the past few days. From her meeting with Sarah to her conversation with Benjamin, she realized she was at a turning point in both her career and personal life. She was more determined than ever to continue fighting, not just in the courtroom, but also in the community, where real change begins. The sun shone brightly over Charlotte as Miriam Carter headed to the courthouse for what promised to be a day of high tension. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, with the media and various interest groups waiting for the start of the hearing that could determine the future of her career. Upon arriving at the courthouse, Miriam noticed an unusual commotion. A group of protesters had gathered in front of the building, holding signs demanding her removal from office. The situation was tense, and the police were visibly present, ensuring that order was maintained. When Miriam entered the courtroom, she was met with curious glances and murmurs from those present. She took her seat on the bench, taking a deep breath to center herself before the session began. Benjamin Cole, her ally, was by her side, offering silent support. Miriam acknowledged him with a nod, feeling some relief at having a friend by her side. The courtroom door opened, and Michael Sterling, the defense attorney for the accusers, entered, followed by a group of assistants and a colleague. Michael, a man in his 50s with an imposing presence, approached the table and greeted Miriam with a challenging look. "Judge Carter," he said formally, but with an undercurrent of tension, "I hope you're ready to face what's coming today." Miriam maintained her composure and responded calmly. "I'm here to hear the arguments and ensure that justice is served as always. Let's get started." The hearing began with Michael presenting his case, criticizing Miriam's decisions and claiming she had shown bias in several cases related to racial issues. He presented a series of evidence and testimonies from critics who alleged that Miriam had a political agenda. Miriam watched attentively, her face impassive, as Michael detailed his accusations. It was clear that the aim was not only to question her decisions, but also to tarnish her public reputation. When it was time for Miriam to respond, she stood up calmly, addressing the court with confidence. "Mr. Sterling and everyone present, I would like to remind you that my duty as a judge is to interpret and apply the law fairly and impartially. The criticisms being raised against me are not based on the facts of the cases, but on an attempt to divert attention from the true purpose of justice." The courtroom was silent, all ears on Miriam's words. Justice is not always comfortable, and sometimes it challenges our biases and personal beliefs. However, it is my duty to ensure that everyone is treated equitably, regardless of their background. As Miriam spoke, she noticed several lawyers in the courtroom who had initially shown some skepticism, beginning to show signs of support. It was evident that her words were resonating with those who believed in the integrity of the judicial system. At the end of the hearing, Miriam sat down with a sigh of relief. Although the session had been exhausting, she felt she had done her best to defend her position. Benjamin approached and placed a comforting hand on Miriam's shoulder. "You did an excellent job today," he said. "Now we need to wait for the board's decision. They will consider all the arguments and evidence presented." Miriam nodded, grateful for the support. "Thank you for being by my side, Benjamin. Your presence made a big difference." As she left the courthouse, Miriam was approached by a few reporters who tried to ask questions about the hearing. She responded cautiously, focusing on the importance of maintaining the integrity of justice and her commitment to fairness. When she returned home, Miriam found Jasmine waiting for her, eager to hear how the day had gone. The two sat at the table, where Miriam recounted the events of the hearing. "It was a tough day, but I feel like I was able to speak the truth and defend what is right," Miriam said, trying to convey her strength to her daughter. Jasmine listened attentively, her gaze full of admiration. "You're showing everyone what it really means to fight for justice, Mom. And I know that no matter what happens, you'll do what's right." Miriam smiled at her daughter, feeling a renewed determination. "Thank you, Jasmine. That means a lot to me. We'll face whatever comes with the same courage and integrity." The day had been draining, but the strength and support of her family and allies gave Miriam the courage she needed to face what lay ahead. With an uncertain future, she knew her fight for justice was far from over, but she was ready to face any challenge that came her way, confident that she was doing the right thing. After days of anticipation and nervousness, the judicial board's decision regarding Miriam Carter's conduct was finally about to be announced. The tension in Charlotte was palpable, with the media and citizens eager to learn the verdict. On the morning of the decision, Miriam prepared for the day at the courthouse. Her home phone rang early, and she answered, recognizing Benjamin Cole's voice on the line. "Miriam, good morning," Benjamin said, his tone a mix of concern and hope. "The board is meeting today to announce the decision. I wanted to make sure you knew that we're here to support you, no matter what happens." "Good morning, Benjamin. Thanks for calling," Miriam replied, feeling a mix of anxiety and gratitude. "I really appreciate the support. I'm heading to the courthouse now. I hope the decision reflects the truth." Benjamin offered words of encouragement. "No matter the outcome, remember that you have the support of many, and your integrity has never been in doubt for those who truly know your work." Miriam thanked him and hung up, taking a deep breath before leaving her house. Upon arriving at the courthouse, she was immediately surrounded by reporters and cameras, all eager for a statement before the announcement. With a tense smile, Miriam answered a few questions, maintaining a professional demeanor. "We don't have detailed information yet. Once the decision is announced, I will make an official statement," Miriam said, trying to keep the anxiety out of her voice. Inside the courthouse, lawyers and staff were gathered, waiting for the session to begin. The atmosphere was charged, with everyone aware of the significance of the moment. Finally, the court's advisor, a middle-aged man named Douglas Haynes, entered the room. He looked serious, and the room immediately fell silent. "Good afternoon, everyone," Haynes began, his voice resonating through the room. "We are here to announce the board's decision regarding the allegations against Judge Miriam Carter. After a thorough review of the arguments and evidence presented, the board has reached a verdict." Miriam's eyes were fixed on Haynes, her heart racing. The anticipation was palpable, and the room was in suspense. After considering all the evidence and hearing arguments from both sides, Haynes continued, "The board has concluded that there was no misconduct on Judge Carter's part. The allegations of bias were found to be baseless, and she will continue to serve as a judge with full integrity." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, and Miriam felt a wave of emotions. While a smile spread across her face, tears of relief and gratitude began to shine in her eyes. Benjamin approached, offering a reassuring smile. "Congratulations, Miriam. You did the right thing and maintained your integrity. This is another victory for justice." Miriam smiled, embracing Benjamin. "Thank you, Benjamin. Your support meant a lot to me throughout this process." As people began to disperse, Miriam was approached by several colleagues and attorneys who expressed their support and congratulations. Among them was Sarah Miller, who had come to the courthouse to hear the decision. "Judge Carter, I just wanted to come by and congratulate you in person," Sarah said, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "You did an amazing job, and I'm so happy for you." Miriam looked at Sarah with deep gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah. Your support and the effort you put into raising awareness were truly inspiring. I'm glad to see that you're making a difference too." Sarah smiled, her enthusiasm contagious. "I've learned so much from you, and I'll keep fighting for justice and equality. Thank you for showing me the way." As the afternoon wore on, Miriam retreated to her office, reflecting on the board's decision and its impact. She knew the path to justice was long and often arduous, but moments like this reassured her that she was heading in the right direction. With the favorable decision and the support of her allies and colleagues, Miriam felt revitalized and more determined than ever to continue her work with dedication and courage. She knew there were many challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them with the same integrity that had always guided her. The day after the board's decision was marked by a sense of relief and renewal. The city of Charlotte was beginning to recover from the tension that had hung over it in recent weeks. Miriam Carter, now relieved of the stress, spent the morning reflecting on everything that had happened. She decided to spend the day away from the courthouse, choosing a peaceful moment in the city park, a place where she often went to find calm and clarity. Upon arriving, she was greeted by the gentle chirping of birds and the fresh scent of flowers. Miriam found a bench under the shade of a large tree and sat down, savoring the serene environment. As she sat there, her daughter Jasmine arrived, carrying a small wrapped gift. "Mom, I brought you something," Jasmine said with a smile. She sat beside Miriam and handed over the gift. Miriam looked at the present with curiosity. "What's this, Jasmine?" Jasmine smiled, her expression full of anticipation. "Just something to show you how much you are admired and loved. Open it and see." Miriam unwrapped the gift and found a handmade photo album. On the cover was written, "To the best mom in the world." She opened the album and discovered a collection of photos from significant moments in her life. Pictures of Jasmine as a child, images from work, and even photos with friends and colleagues. Each page was decorated with small notes of thanks and messages of support. "Mom, I wanted you to know how much you mean to me and to everyone who knows you. This album is just a small reflection of the positive impact you've had on our lives," Jasmine explained, her eyes shining. Miriam felt a wave of emotions. She looked at Jasmine and, with a choked voice, said, "Thank you, Jasmine. This means more to me than you can imagine. I couldn't have gone through all this without your support." Jasmine wrapped her arms around Miriam, offering a tight hug. "I'll always be by your side, Mom. You've shown everyone that justice and integrity matter, even when it's hard." "I hope we can continue to make a difference," Miriam said, pulling Jasmine closer. "There's still much work to be done and many challenges ahead, but knowing I have my family's support gives me the strength to carry on." The two spent some time in the park, talking about the future and reflecting on the lessons learned. As the sun began to set, Miriam felt renewed, as if the weight of the past weeks had been lifted. Later, upon arriving home, Miriam found a letter on the table. It was from Sarah Miller, who had written a note expressing her gratitude for everything Miriam had done. Asterisk, "Judge Carter, I would like to express my deepest gratitude for inspiring me to fight for justice and equality. Your courage and integrity have been a beacon of hope. I will continue to follow your example and hope that we can work together again in the future. With sincere thanks, Sarah. Asterisk. Miriam read the letter with a smile, deeply touched by Sarah's words. She knew that the fight for justice and equality didn't end with the board's decision. It was an ongoing effort that required commitment and courage. That night, as she prepared for bed, Miriam reflected on her journey. She had faced challenges, dealt with criticism, and battled prejudice. But more importantly, she had found support in unexpected places and reaffirmed her belief in justice. With a sense of hope and renewal, Miriam turned off the lights and lay down. She knew the future would bring new challenges, but she was ready to face them with the same integrity and dedication that had always guided her. And above all, she was ready to continue making a difference, inspiring others to follow the path of justice and humanity. That night, Miriam slept peacefully, knowing that her journey was just beginning and that, with the support of her family and allies, she would continue to fight for a fairer and more equal world.